Welcome again, everyone. Today, Dr. Elizabeth Rogers will share a discussion about tips to manage past anxiety for children with learning differences. So Dr. Rogers is currently an assistant professor of school counseling at West Texas A&M University, and she's certified school counselor and also licensed professional counselor in Texas. And she has experiences as a dyslexia teacher and also school counselor in various ISDs. And she's also president-elected of the Texas School Counseling Association, and also is passionate about advocating for school counselor and implementing their intended and appropriate roles. So welcome everyone, and also welcome Dr. Rogers for today's workshop. And please check your chat. We just shared slide, and that link will direct you to the Google Docs so that you can download. And if you click download button on the slide.
Great, thank you. I'm also just going to remind everybody just to make sure that you're muted, and then there will be an opportunity for questions. So you feel free to just type in your questions into the chat, and we'll answer those periodically. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that everyone can see this.
And then came in.
Please let me know if you're not able to view this. Sounds good. Okay. So this kind of comes at a very, very appropriate time in the school year. We know we have STAR coming up, but that's not the only test that is coming up. This is something I wanted to address to make sure that we know we have the skills for all assessments that we'll be taking moving forward. And this is something to get into a good practice of, to just address your anxiety. And the best thing to address anxiety in any regard is to overplan and over-prepare. So you know how to basically mitigate the effects of anxiety. So a lot of the things I'm talking about today are going to be good universally for anybody, but there are some sections that are tailored specifically to students with learning differences. So we've already done our introductions. And another goal that I have for this particular presentation is I want to make sure I'm educating all of you on some best practices and things we can do moving forward. Any parents that are here want to make sure to empower you so that you are equipped with some really good strategies that you can help your own children with. And also any teachers that are here today, empowering your students to address test anxiety and equip you with the tools that can help mitigate some of these effects. And then also some of these tools are going to be really helpful for you to intervene with some of the effects of anxiety that we see that presents itself. So moving forward, what is test anxiety? I'm sure overall that definition is pretty clear. It's a combination of physical symptoms and emotional reactions that interfere with your ability to perform well on tests. Pretty straightforward, but it manifests in a number of different ways. And as with any kind of education component, many students experience very, very different, they experience it in different ways and varying levels. So this can be more prevalent in the elementary, and then as you equip yourself better with tools, you get better through middle school and high school, and through college. So these are some really good skills just to like practice moving forward. But it may be that you didn't have any test anxiety when you were younger, but that you're starting to see that those things creep up in your middle school and high school, and then are more exacerbated in college because the stress level is higher. So it is varying levels of test anxiety across the board. It can physically present itself through headache, nausea, excessive sweating, shortness of breath. You're feeling faint, having that kind of panic attack kind of mentality. And also just know that anxiety is kind of synonymous with fear. It's a fear reaction in your body. And so in our fight or flight response, when our cortisol starts kicking in our brain, we start to have these physical symptoms where we have shortness of breath and headache and nausea. And so it can present that way. It also can present as an emotional symptom. So you might have feelings of stress, more fear, helplessness, just kind of a sense of dread, rumination about past poor performances, or fear of consequences of failure, or making yourself feel inadequate or helpless. Sometimes your anxiety can trigger a time when your mind kind of goes blank, and that's that fight or flight response. Fight, flight, or freeze really is just like an overload of cortisol to the brain that just sets your body into one thing. And so we have to kind of remap our brain and retrain ourselves to experience this a different way, because we are all going to feel anxiety at some time in our life. It's just mitigating those effects. Another way that it can actually present itself, and you might see with your students, if you have students or young children, you might notice that they have difficulty concentrating. They have a lot of negative thoughts or rumination about negative things. They may compare themselves to others, particularly students who see an exceptional learner in their class at the same time. They may start having a lot of negative self-talk and degrading themselves in comparison to that. And so that can also lead in another behavioral type into procrastinating. When you are so nervous about an assignment or about a test or about some kind of assessment, you kind of procrastinate yourself into a frizzy where you won't really actually participate in learning the activities or preparing the materials. You procrastinate long enough, and that actually exacerbates that anxiety and makes it worse, but it's kind of like a pushing it away. And so those are three ways that anxiety can manifest itself. So a lot of the cause for this anxiety can come from past experiences of the fear of failure. You put immense pressure on yourselves or associate self-worth with your grade on the test. Students might ruminate on negative thoughts regarding themselves. This is particularly this is something that gifted students feel pretty exceptionally whenever they have a perfectionism kind of impact in the brain, and they actually want to be perfect at every time. And so they have this fear of failure that can almost be crippling. And so that's kind of how that manifests in one way. Another way is the lack of preparation. Students might wait until the last minute to prepare for a test. Like I said, the procrastination piece. And we also know that through a number of studies, cramming, though it might work in the short term, you might have some small short-term memory recall throughout the spans of a long test or more than half an hour. All of that cramming kind of goes out of your brain, and it's really not successful in the long run. So you kind of end up with those feelings of being extremely overwhelmed, and you have actual more anxiety going forward. So the lack of preparation can really lead to a lot of test anxiety as well. Another area where this can cause test anxiety is poor test history. Lack of experience for the test, not exceeding on a previous exam can make you anxious for the next one going forward. So it's really important to stay in the present moment when taking an exam, so you can make sure that you're focused on exactly what's happening in that moment. Trying not to dwell on the past, on a previous failure or a previous misconception or a previous experience that you have had. It's really difficult for again, for gifted learners in this particular area to move going forward. It can be crippling. Also for students with dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, those learning differences, that this can be kind of crippling for them as well, because usually when we start doing exams and formal assessments, that's when we actually get to know when a student is having some difficulty. So we see poor performance on exams and we see poor performance on assessments, and that sometimes can trigger, it usually does trigger, the need for an assessment going forward, but they still have that experience and that thought of, I did really terrible on this exam, I need a lot of help. And moving forward, that can be a very impactful moment for them. And so it's really just making sure that we're addressing poor test history with appropriate accommodations moving forward. And I'm going to talk about that at the later part of this presentation, but making sure that we're supporting those students with learning differences, especially after we have just identified them with a learning disability, making sure that, okay, we know that there is something going on here that is cognitive. It's not your fault. There's no value or worth tied to it. We're just going to make sure we put things in place in your education plan to make sure you're successful going forward. And so a lot of that can be addressed by the teacher, by the parents, by the school counselor, making sure that those students feel supported in that way moving forward. So, because we want them to be excited about school and engaged in school. And when they feel that they fail, they start to disengage. And that's where we see those behavior problems creep up. So we want to make sure that they're fully supported in that regard. The other one I wanted to touch on was the perfectionism. As I addressed earlier with gifted learners, this is specifically something that affects them a lot, but it doesn't have to be just gifted learners. It might be many. And it's about, it's identified as having a extremely high performance expectation for yourself. Studies show that students with high perfectionism and high self-criticism tend to have high test anxiety as well and end up actually doing worse on exams. So we want to make sure that we equip students with the ability to recognize that they've worked very, very hard and allow for some mistakes. Perfectionism, we cannot all be perfect all the time. We might get 100 on one test and a 98 on the other. That's totally okay. Or 100 on one and an 85 on the other, and that's still okay. It's all about the post-test intervention that actually goes into, okay, what did I do well to prepare for this? What did I do in a positive, having that positive self-talk moving forward. So here are some strategies on what we can actually do immediately moving forward to reduce test anxiety. The biggest thing is really preparation. So one of my favorite quotes actually from Oprah is preparation, or success and luck is preparation meets opportunity. So that is one of the things, is preparation is a huge part of mitigating the effects of test anxiety or anxiety in general. Like I said, if you experience any type of anxiety, not specifically test anxiety, but anxiety about anything, about fear of flying, fear of, I don't know, I can't think of anything right now, but any kind of instance that instills like a fear in you or have that anxiety response, extra preparation over preparation, preparing yourself out of that anxiety is really what's going to help you there. So a way to do that is make sure you're empowering your students by developing a consistent routine for preparing for tests. So what that can look like is, when you know a test is coming up, make sure that you're practicing some of those questions, that you know what is actually going to be on the test, what material is going to be covered. If you are a parent, this might be you actively speaking with the teacher and making sure that you're aware of exactly what assignments are coming up and how to actually set that routine of preparing for every exam going forward. Making sure that you're writing down or creating a calendar for upcoming tests. You don't want to be surprised on test day. One of the biggest things you can probably do to trigger a panic attack is to show up and like, oh man, that test was today, and not have prepared for it at all. So definitely developing a plan and knowing when those tests are scheduled out. And this could be also for I mean, through high school, middle school, high school, university tests, any of those exams, knowing your time frame, and then planning a study schedule for the days leading up to the exam. Like I said, cramming is historically not successful and you end up usually blanking. It's good for short-term memory recall with very simple concepts, but when it comes to actual Bloom's taxonomy, when we're thinking about those higher level concepts where we have to analyze and interpret and all of those things, and especially two-part questions like factual recall, it might help you in the short term, but is not going to help you with an analytical test or a writing test or a reading test when you're having to analyze those answers or do two-part answers. Cramming is not going to help. So that's what I can enforce. I just want to impart that on anybody who is listening. Cramming will not be helpful to you. Creating a schedule for the days leading up to the exam, and then also knowing your own strengths when it comes to preparing for the exam. For example, one experience that I have as a person who's gone through public school, one of my favorite things to do was to write out the questions ahead of time, just actually tactfully like writing everything out and listing, like even when I was in theater, I would write out all my lines, and that helped me memorize those things. So I would take notes. That's just my way that I knew that I would be successful on exam. Another person may record a lecture or record themselves speaking the materials and then listen to it back. That might be really helpful for an auditory learner. Also, sometimes factual knowledge, creating flashcards might be helpful for somebody. Creating mnemonics or memory devices might be helpful for a diverse learner. Also, drawing or interpreting a concept or difficult strategy might be helpful for a typical learner it might be helpful for a different learner. Also, a lot of what we see with gifted learners is a different way of interpreting some of the concepts. So it might be acting out a certain concept, or like, for example, if you were gonna do a lesson on history and we're going to talk about the Constitution or something like that, actually acting out some of those things might be helpful for the kinesthetic learner to get those things more imprinted in the brain. And so those things can be very, very helpful, but it has to be something that is unique specifically to your child. So if you're a teacher, think of your students and the different ways that they learn, and maybe help them before a test, put them into groups and talk to them about a different way to prepare for the test. And the important thing to know, if you are a teacher and you're going to try this strategy, let them try out a lot of different ways, and then they get to figure that way out on their own, whether they're somebody that wants to write it out and read it just like I was, or it's somebody who wants to act out that concept or wants to record it and hear it again in a different way. So it's really just kind of adapting to the learning styles of each of your students. And as a parent, you probably know the style for your child, so make sure that teacher is aware of how your child best learns and how your child best studies for something. Having that support in both areas is going to be very helpful for you. Let's see here. Okay, and practicing for the test. So we have preparation, and then another part of preparation is going to be practicing. I did have some links on here. I'm not going to actually click on those and go to a different screen at this point, but you have access to these slides, so you can click on these links and explore these kind of on your own time. And I'll explain all those as we go forward, but I just wanted to make sure that you had all these resources for you. For a parent, make sure that you're asking your teacher if there's older versions of a test to allow for more practice. If it is maybe it's an old, I'm thinking of a high school student. So if you're going to be taking an AP test, or if you're taking some kind of specific exam. See if there's a different version of that test that you can have released to you as a parent, and then you can help your student in whatever way is the best way for them to the best way that they study, allow them to practice those questions as much as possible. When it comes to the STAR test, there's a number of released STAR tests going all the way back until forever since we've really started STAR. You can actually see those questions, you can take those assessments, and you can actually see what concepts your student is struggling with, and how what type of questions that you can help address. And so you can kind of pull those from those release tests. They also have all the answers provided at the end of the test too. And again, the more exposure you have going forward is going to be the most helpful. So the more exposure to the material, the different ways of answering questions, so you're not going to be surprised when a new question comes that addresses that specific concept. So with STAR, we know that in 7th grade STAR, you're going to be assessed on this, this, and this. And so the past release tests aren't really, it's not new TEKs that they are addressing. It's just a different way of asking a question that answers or addresses that TEK. And so looking at those release tests might give you a better idea of what you're going to be assessed on going forward. Also, it's really just good practice. You can do practice STAR tests for a grade above if you wanted to see what kind of material that you should be preparing for maybe in 8th grade or in Algebra 1, making sure that you're aware of the kind of things that you're going to be learning so you can start preparing yourself now, again, to mitigate that fear response or the anxiety response. Another way you can do this to practice for that test is to make sure that you are practicing that test in the same type of environment or similar environment to the environment you're going to be in when you take that assessment. So as we know, with STAR testing, it is definitely, in a large group classroom. It is a quiet environment. The teachers are keeping things quiet. You're at your desk. You have your pencil. Now that it's online, you have your Chromebook, and you have your scratch paper. And so practicing those things at home, maybe in a 30-minute session or something, might be really, really helpful for a student moving forward, making sure that they are addressing that environment in the same way, so they're not surprised when it comes to testing day. One thing that you do see in middle school and high school is students they're not exactly in the same classroom they normally are whenever they're taking the STAR test. And same thing with SAT and PSAT. They might be in their homeroom classroom for the practice versions, but then on STAR day, they get sorted into different environments depending on their accommodation needs and such. And so making sure that your student knows exactly where they're going the day of the test, preparing them for the environment they're going to be in, and knowing that, hey, it's okay if there's a little bit of a change, or there's something might come up and they might move to another one or another room or something. Adaptability is something that is very, very helpful as well. So making sure that you're practicing that same environment, and then also practice time constraints. The STAR test really, now it doesn't really have a time constraint, but there are other tests that are timed. There are some tests that need to be completed in a certain time frame. And if your learning difference doesn't have an accommodation that goes with that, then you really do have to practice being in that timed area. So practice those questions in a time constraint environment as well. And then, as I said earlier, the way you study is going to dictate how you perform and how you learn, and how all of your different learning styles is going to come out that way. Practice according to your learning style as well. Practice that test in the way that best suits you. Another huge factor that's going to be very important to mitigating test anxiety is making sure that you are keeping your lifestyle choices in a good, healthy congruence and a good I guess equilibrium is what I kind of want to think of. Definitely, we know that sleep is important, but I still think that no one really gets enough sleep. So, for example, for the APA actually recommends 9 to 11 hours of sleep for students, for children ages 5 to 11. So that's 9 to 11 hours. That means if you want your child, if you're going to get up at 7 a.m., you really want your child to start getting ready for bed and start that wind down routine right around 7:30 or 8 o'clock to make sure that they are up by 7 and off. And if you have to be at the bus or at school a little bit earlier, maybe starting that routine a little bit earlier. We want to make sure that we have really good sleep hygiene, making sure that that routine is the same every single night. And of course, we know that children have lots of different activities and things that they're participating in. And sometimes you have crazy days where things just get off a little bit later. But maintaining a consistent routine is really essential to making sure we have really good sleep hygiene. And we know that with sleep, that's when you grow. That's when all those wrinkles in your brain start making those connections. You get more wrinkles in your brain the longer you are at rest with proper nutrition and things like that. So making sure that we have a really solid routine. And that might look like also making sure we don't have our screens on prior to bed. So at least half an hour before you expect your child to be falling asleep or winding down. And it's not even your child. This is really just for adults, high school students, college students, all around, trying to mitigate that screen time because we know that that blue light kind of triggers the effect of the sun in your brain. And so we want to make sure that you are away from all of that light on your way to going to bed. Try to keep similar sleep and wake times, even through the weekend. There is research that shows it doesn't really matter if you sleep later on the weekend or stay up later. There is no catching up on sleep or catching up on hours. That really is not something that is an efficacious thing or a scientifically proven thing. It really needs to be more consistent with sleep and wake times, even on the weekends. Of course, like I said, we have crazy days, but being aware of that, I can't reinforce the importance of sleep. We know that we have improved concentration and improved fact recall whenever we do have a good night's rest. And we always know it, we feel better as well. Again, addressing proper diet is a very, very important aspect of mitigating test anxiety as well. You want to make sure that you're discouraging any kind of sugary or caffeinated drinks before bed or even on the morning of the test. You might feel like, hey, I'm going to get this burst of caffeine and sugar, but what we know that happens is that triggers an immediate response and you get a fast sugar glucose high, but then you kind of drop off, and that can actually lead to everything in your body going slower. You kind of get an overload of sugars and everything kind of drops off at that point. And just being aware of what type of things you might want to substitute for breakfast and healthy things for your child and in your brain. Leafy greens are something that's really good for keeping those connections going, making sure that you have healthy fats moving forward. So eggs and fried eggs in the morning, that is a better alternative than having like a bowl of cereal because there's so much sugar there. Sauteing some spinach in the morning might be helpful moving forward rather than even like a Pop-Tart or anything like that. We want to make sure we have a healthy breakfast. And orange juice and apple juice, just being aware of the sugar content of those. Like I said, 10 ounces of apple juice, it's not added sugar, but when it processes down in your body, it still ends up being sugar. So 10 ounces of apple juice equals 1 can of Coke. So even if you're thinking you're making a healthy choice by giving an apple juice, it is equivalent in your body to pretty much having a bottle of Coke. So making sure that we're aware of planning a breakfast ahead of time and setting that up is really going to help you with a healthier approach in that regard. So some pre-test strategies, so like the day before the test, Something, getting a good night's sleep, of course, is something that I emphasized earlier. Making sure that you gather all the materials you need in advance. Knowing where you're going to be on the test day, making sure that you have access to your pencils. If it needs a calculator, if it's a bring your own calculator situation, making sure you have all those materials and such packed the night before so you're not scrambling in the morning. Again, all of this is over preparation to kind of get yourself out of that test anxiety mentality. Arriving on time and knowing where you're going to be, making sure you eat a healthy breakfast. Another way to kind of calm yourself before the test, play calming music. Classical music is always wonderful, but there's also kind of, there's an entire lovely, relaxing playlist of Taylor Swift that is on Spotify that you can find anywhere. Just making sure that you have calming music that is without lyrics. That's the other important thing, because lyrics trigger, when you're trying to do like a calm down routine and try to close your mind off and focus on in the present, having lyrics and extra things going on is really distracting. And so try to find music that you enjoy but doesn't have lyrics. And even if you are a teacher and you are doing just like a practice assessment or even a benchmark in your class or something like that, having calming music playing actually is very, very helpful to your class. And having kind of dimmed lighting, that's a very, very calming environment for your students. So I would definitely suggest that if you're having I know that's not allowed during the actual formalized STAR test assessment, but if you're doing other types of assessment, that's something that you can consider in your classroom. One thing that is very, very helpful for everybody moving forward with any type of preparation you have, maybe for a job interview or for an assessment or for a presentation, even visualizing your success in that initiative. So what that means is just closing your eyes and walking through step by step what it's going to look like, what you envision yourself doing on that day of the test or during that interview. When you prepare and you practice those skills ahead of time, it's a lot easier for you to visualize your success during the test. And so as you get into your seat and you're calming yourself down, take some deep breaths and close your eyes, visualize what it would look like for you to be successful. One of the things that this concept really brings to mind is many professions, sports, they all use this concept of visualizing their success. For example, I do have to bring up Formula One drivers. When there's a track coming up or a specific track, they memorize all the turns of the track and they memorize what gear they're going to be in at every single turn. So they visualize what it's going to look like moving through that track and moving through that area. And so having that preparedness really enhances your reaction time whenever it comes to actually doing the test or doing that drive. And so visualizing is just such a really, really important aspect for pre-test as well. Again, engaging in some positive self-talk or having some kind of mantra prepared for you, that is also kind of up there with the success of visualizing something. So making sure that you let yourself know, you know what, I've got this. I've been prepared. I'm going to do as best I can. Try to minimize the way you say, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be, or you might be perfect on there, but you can just kind of be forgiving and kind to yourself as you are engaging in your positive self-talk. Or maybe having a mantra that you really enjoy saying. For example, something might be, I am prepared the best I possibly can be in this moment. And just repeating that back to yourself, coming up with something that is positive. For a young student, you might have them create something for themselves, or it might be a song lyric or something. And that's something they can memorize and even write down on their scratch paper so they can review and go back to that while they're going through the test to calm them down. I did include a link to, let's see if this is going to work. Please let me know if this doesn't work, but I did want to show you this WTAMU model. Are you still able to see this? Y'all just let me know if you can't. Okay, so as a counselor, one way of addressing anxiety is to do reality therapy. And this is a WTAMU worksheet. This is something that like clinical counselors use, but I did want to expose it to you just so you're aware of it. A WTAMU is kind of a worksheet. It's a planning tool that can help you moving forward. So what it stands for is your wants, what you need to do, your evaluation of that action, and then your plan moving forward for how you want to change. And so it's kind of a cognitive behavioral adaptation to addressing a concept or a problem or something you're struggling with. So some of the examples are, what do you want? What do you want instead of this problem? What do you want to do instead of this? What is your picture quality of life relationship? What do your family and friends want for you? Just what are you wanting to do moving forward? And then what are you doing to address that? What are your thoughts around this activity? When you think or act this way, so if it's test anxiety that's specifically affecting you, when you think about test anxiety, it's kind of how are you feeling? What are your thoughts, your actions regarding your health? So just jotting down some thoughts and things like that can kind of help you. Getting it on paper makes you be aware of might be happening. And then you evaluate what you're doing to address that. Are some of your actions that you're doing like staying up late or not eating healthy or cramming or not preparing for the test? Is that action going to get you to where you want to be? So it's evaluating those little places in your life that you can make adjustments, and then you can make a plan moving forward. So that's where you create that plan, and so you can go back and say, okay, last time I did this, this, and this, and that was not successful. So I am going to do it a different way and do this, this, and this to make that successful. And so this is a very reality therapy, I mean, it is an actual technique and model, and you can work with a counselor in this regard, but I did want to just expose this to you so you're aware of something that can be helpful for you. Let me go back to this. Okay. Did I address the last piece? SMART goals, I did link an area of SMART goals as well. That's just making sure that any goals moving forward when you're preparing, if you have a goal for the test, perhaps it's like a certain grade or it's a certain score or a certain number answered in a timely manner, writing out SMART goals is very important. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So it's time constrained. And so there's a process of going through those goals that this is a wonderful lesson that you can have your school counselor come in and do SMART goals for your whole class throughout a guidance lesson. Or if you're a teacher, creating small SMART goals throughout the year. Definitely engage your school counselor to come in and teach your whole class on how to do this, and then reinstate and re-emphasize and practice it going forward throughout the whole year. And that's something that you can really do. That's great with goal planning and stuff for future tests. And like I said, collaborate with other school professionals. So you might want to create a plan with your diagnostician or your case manager for special education. Maybe your dyslexia teacher has a specific plan going forward. Collaborate with all the stakeholders involved to make sure that you are addressing the specific needs for your particular student. And then the test taking strategies that we have, there's lots of relaxation techniques that you can do while you are actually taking the test. I kind of shared with you the preparation techniques and the positive self-talk and visualization, but I did, here's the relaxation techniques that I recommend for many students. Square breathing, that's a link to just a YouTube video. If you just Google square breathing, or even on YouTube, you can check out what square breathing is, but it's very, very basic. If you just imagine a square, or you can draw out a square on your paper, when you go from one vertice, so the corner, you breathe in at one vertice and then out at the next vertice. So if you're breathing in a square, breathe in, out, in, and out. And it really just calms your breathing, and it distracts you to focus on something else. So what I would do for my student, if they were experiencing something like this, I would have them on their scratch paper, when they get to the STAR test, draw out a square, and then they can actually practice with their pencil, breathing in on one side when they get to a vertice, breathe out, going down another corner, breathe in. And so they can actually have that on their paper and practice that breathing as they are taking the test. And at different times, if they get to a question that's difficult, if they need a break, taking a moment to do the square breathing is something helpful. Another technique is color breathing. And so that might be during the test or before the test, any time to calm you down. What that entails is you basically think of a color, or you think of a color associated with like a bad feeling. And so you're breathing in whatever is happening that is negative, and you have a color kind of attached to that. So for me, I would think of, maybe I'm thinking of navy blue, and I'm just like, that's something that is not very comfortable for me. But then as I'm breathing in, I'm processing, I'm also going to breathe out bright yellow, because that is a sign of happiness and brightness and success. So I'm going to breathe in that navy blue, and I'm going to imagine breathing out yellow. And again, it's another visualization technique that is very helpful for calming your heart rate, refocusing, and it's really great for your artistic or visual learners just to imagine breathing something in that way. And so those are two different techniques that are pretty successful with elementary through high school, if you can teach them those techniques. Another thing that's really great to do is tension release. And so I'm already adjusting in my chair. If you can just do this with me, I'll talk to you about what that looks like. So tension release is basically starting at your toes, and you clench your toes for a few seconds, and then you release. And then you tense your ankles, and then you release. And then you feel your muscles all the way up. You tense your calves and your knees for a few seconds, and then you release. And you just move up your body, focusing on every single muscle group in your body, including your hands up into your arms, your neck, and then you release. And so while you're doing that, you're just kind of, it's like the color breathing. You are taking all that negative and tension, and then intentionally releasing that energy, basically, is what it is. You're kind of letting that flow. That is a very, very successful technique for any kind of kinesthetic learner, especially because it's something that you can do while sitting down, but it's still a movement, and it's still an activity that kind of, you feel like your body is moving, but you're not moving around the classroom. You're still sitting at your desk. Another relaxation exercise, I've linked it here to another YouTube video, but it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is kind of addressing your senses. So you can mix up the senses however you want to, but if you think of, you want to focus on 5 things that you can see. Okay, I'm in my room right now. I see my ring light. I see a book. I see my water bottle. So you're focusing on things around you. Then 4 things that you can hear. So I can hear myself speaking. I can hear my 2-year-old in the bathtub next to my room. I could hear the wind outside my window. It's just kind of focusing outside of you. It might be 3 things that you can smell, but you can alternate those things. But you basically go down the senses, and you concentrate on just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with all of your senses. And that's another thing, just to get you kind of outside of your anxiety, because if you are thinking of something other than your own fear and anxiety, then that's going to help mitigate some of those aspects. observation and distraction, that's kind of what the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is, but it's also if you wanted to see, okay, I can see things that are square in the room. I see squares here. I see circles here. If you want to identify things, again, just to get yourself out of that fear mindset, you focus outwardly, and then you can kind of redirect and focus on your test. Another relaxation technique might be to take a break from an assessment, do a low impact exercise like walk around. If you maybe have it in your accommodation plan to take a break, take frequent breaks, getting up and walking and going outside the room, getting a drink of water, getting your blood flowing again, that's perfectly acceptable for students with learning differences. And it might be part of their accommodation plan already, but doing low impact exercise kind of gets that blood flowing again, especially if you need that little break. All of these healthy coping skills combined with relaxation techniques is kind of like, that's the equilibrium that you want. You want to make sure that you have a foundation of healthy coping skills, and then you get to pair with your relaxation skills, and that's going to help mitigate across the board. And so this is actually taken directly from the Mayo Clinic and how they paired all of these. I'm not going to read them individually because I really want to dive into accommodations and what that would look like. Man, I've been talking a lot. I want to make sure I address accommodations first, so you can re-examine this and revisit this in a moment whenever you get a chance. Feel free to always go back to this PowerPoint. You'll always have access to it. Post-test strategies, again, breathe. You finished. You engage in positive self-talk. I did it. I am done with this. Take note of your feelings and how you feel afterwards, and also take note of how your preparation met the needs. So, or what you can do moving forward. If you didn't study a certain way and you, oh man, I missed this completely, next time go forward and do that. And so having that positive self-talk moving forward is really going to be the game changer when it comes to alleviating your own anxiety and fighting off those really negative feelings that can lead to like depression and more depressive symptoms and things like that. So you're wanting to engage in all that positive self-talk, find the positive aspect in everything. So for dyslexia, I listed a number of accommodations here, and for any parents or teachers, I also linked the actual accommodations triangle that is on the TEA website. So these are directly linked to the TEA accommodations for STAR. For dyslexia, the best kind of accommodations that's going to help a student be successful on the test, again, it's going to be practice and preparation. So with all of these accommodations moving forward, when you're talking to a student and making their IEPs, their individual education plan, or their accommodation plan if they're in 504, in any regard, every student needs to use this in the classroom routinely and effectively. So what that means is it's already built in their routine. They're being taught how to use all these accommodations, and it is effective. We have data that shows that this accommodation is used often, and they are more successful when they use this accommodation. That's what routinely and effective means. So you need to be able to show that this is helpful moving forward. For dyslexia students, here's the list that I gave. This is not exhaustive. There might be other things that are specific for your child, but this is what is available to you. Oral and signed administration is great. One of the qualifications for that is you have to be identified with dyslexia or a similar disability, reading difficulty or disability. You have to have a documented evidence of reading difficulties. And what this can look like is text to speech. So the actual computer will read the passage. No, it won't read the passage. Sorry. It will not read the passage on a reading exam ever. It will read the questions and the answer choices. So it can either be by student requesting it to read, or it can be auto text to speech. So when they go to the question, it just automatically starts reading it, and you can hit play to play it again over and over. You can always have it read as many times as possible. So that's another good thing that's helpful to keep attention on. And of course, we know our dyslexia students need things auditorily read for them to process those. Basic transcribing is another thing that's going to be helpful for dyslexic students, because it allows for them to either, there's a lot of writing aspects that are on the STAR now. So this allows for them to auditorily say something and have another person transcribe what they need to, and that can look differently in the classroom depending on the need of the student. Content and language supports means there might be rollovers. You click on a vocabulary word, it might give the vocabulary definition, or there might be another picture that goes for something on the test, and that is something that might be appropriate for a dyslexic student. Spelling assistant is something that can be turned on for dyslexic students, especially since there's a writing component, a typing component on the test. So having spelling assistant, either a list of frequently misspelled words or having spell check on, something like that is going to be appropriate for a dyslexic student. Supplemental aids, individual structured reminders, those are like a paper clip or a note card that has something on there that's kind of like a memory or a note card that is kind of created between the teacher and the students, like as a reminder. So maybe breaking up the test into smaller chunks, or maybe it's more time reminders for that student. There's not really a time constraint on the STAR test now, so students can have until the end of the day, but we want them to, so you can take frequent breaks, but they do have to have it complete within that day. So those are some examples of some things that are successful for dyslexic students. Dysgraphia, a lot of those accommodations, I removed the oral accommodations from that. Whether it's routinely or effectively, it may be helpful or not, but these are the ones that still might be appropriate for a dysgraphic student. For a student with ADHD, that oral and sign administration, whether it's text-to-speech or auto text-to-speech, that's going to be very helpful for them because it helps them maintain focus. So when they having to read that long reading passage, they're using their test strategies, having it orally read to them helps them focus on the line, focus on the A, B, C, or D, and then allows them to, if they did get distracted, they can hit play again and have that question be read to them again. And so that's why oral and sign administration is really helpful for these students in particular. Supplemental aids like mnemonics and memory devices might be helpful as well. Individualized structured reminders, like I said, like a note card that talks about, okay, here's an extra reminder of time. Here's 5 minutes left or an hour left, or however it needs to be. If you do an individualized structured reminder, it really has to be specific to that student. And so the teacher needs to work that out ahead of time. You can also teach ADHD students to chunk tests to make it into smaller amounts. Having frequent breaks because there's not really an extended time on the STAR test, allow them to get up, move around, get the blood flow, drink some water, and then move back into the test. And again, those accommodations are specific to the STAR test, but they can be adapted to other tests. And just know moving forward for high school and college students, if you have a history of a disability and you apply to College Board with documented evidence that these things have been successful for you, you can also get these accommodations on your SAT, PSAT, and those other College Board type tests. But you do have to have documentation that shows that they are successful, like getting time and a half and things like that. So they are available to you. You just really have to advocate for yourself and engage other professionals when making those plans for yourself. For gifted learners, I said this earlier, preparation is extremely important, making sure they have calming techniques, and then positive self-talk is going to be the best thing to mitigate that perfectionism aspect for gifted students. I ran through a lot of that very, very quickly, and I'm totally happy to stay on any longer for any questions moving forward. So if we have any questions from the chat or anything anyone else wanted to speak about, I will definitely stay on past the 6 o'clock mark. But is there anything that I can address with anybody that has been here?
Well, Dr. Rogers, thank you so much. We currently do not have any questions in the chat, but I would encourage any of you that might have a question to type that in. And Dr. Simmons or Dr. Hart, do you have any questions?
I have one comment. So first thing, Dr. Rogers, that was amazing. Just to the audience in general, for those of you that have students with autism, that are taking, perhaps students with autism in the general education class that are taking the on-level STAR test. A lot of these rehearsal strategies that she mentioned in the beginning, anything that increases predictability for those students are tremendously helpful. So for instance, talking about what room you're going to be in, perhaps where the student's sitting, perhaps taking the student in to say, okay, let's sit, here's a practice test, let's do it here. Anything that increases the predictability is going to help those students with particularly high functioning autism be ready and prepared to address that potentially stressful situation. So anything that's preventative or previewing, remember that for your students with ADHD, your students with dyslexia, your students with special needs, and also your students with autism.
Great, thank you, Dr. Hart. Dr. Shin, we do have a question about a link for the CEUs. If people need CEUs, we will post that in the chat.
Yes, we will do that shortly. Yes. And I will ask one short question. So, Dr. Rogers, so we have STAR tests shortly. So until that time, what will be a good tip to prepare as a parent and in addition to teachers? What will be a good tip preparing for that, or any way to take some time with kids who have many diverse high level of anxiety?
Yeah, in general, for any student, regardless if there's a learning difference or not, as you're I can guarantee you in the classroom, they're preparing. They're doing lots of practice questions and things like that. They probably are kind of overloaded in that regard. So like practicing the test and practicing questions and practicing what it's going to look like. I would definitely, if you have younger students, go through that visualization, try some of those visualization techniques, like what's it going to look like on the day that you show up? You're going to go and you're going to find your test, walk through it step by step. I'm going to have this pencil and I'm going to draw a square on my paper so I can know my breathing techniques or something like that. So kind of walking through that preparation piece. And then also I would just be extremely positive in talking to them. Positive reinforcement is going to be very, very good for teachers and for parents moving forward. Just any kind of if you can identify, maybe they did something on a previous test, look what you did on this. You know that you've done this before, you can do this again. You know, a lot of that positive reinforcement is going to be helpful for those younger kids. And if you notice that they are having some of that creeped up anxiety, depending on what your family what your family values are, if you want them to memorize a Bible verse, that might help them be comfortable. If you want them to memorize a mantra or some kind of positive, something simple that makes them feel comforted and makes them feel kind of positive and worthwhile moving forward, just get them in that mindset. Because I think academically, your teachers really are doing a good job of preparing them and making sure that they know what's on the test and what it's going to look like. So I think if you just kind of take a step back and do that other supportive role, that's going to be really helpful to you as well. But if you feel in any regard that the teacher, that there's something missing in that preparation at school, then you can also just do a couple practice questions from a release test a couple of years ago or something, just to see where they're at and talk through those answers and how they got to that answer. You can practice that with the science test, math, reading, any of those. You can just do a few questions. I wouldn't overload them though, because like I said, they are really doing a lot of gear up and preparation at school. But a few practice questions might be helpful as well. But I can't say enough just to have positive feedback at all times. And just teaching them that skill to have that positive self-talk as well.
So I posted some things in the chat to help us and to give you some links to plan for future workshops. We have the continuing education certificate. There's a link to that. I believe that there was just a question about that. We have a link to a survey if you'd like to tell us how we did and how you, your thoughts on this particular topic. We have a link to register if you're interested in registering for next, the upcoming meetings. We have an Academic Language Therapy Association meeting on April 20th. We have a community workshop on 5/1. The community workshop is going to be really exciting. It's going to be a panel where we have adults and young adults with learning differences, and they're going to be talking about how they learn to cope and really exist in the world. And as they became, finished college and graduated from high school and really entered the workforce. And then the last thing we have is if you'd like to join our mailing list, if you're not already on it, there is an email to let us know you'd like to join the mailing list.
Okay, and I also attach my contact information there. I am at West Texas A&M, so feel free to reach out to me at any point. I am happy to share this or any other strategies with you. So feel free to contact me if you ever need to. Other than that, I'll stay on to answer any other questions, but it looks like we're in good shape. Thank you so much, everybody.